Download the AllStar app. Make your picks for UFC fights, challenge your friends, level up and win prizes. Link in description. Get it now.
The UFC is doing something that's so apparent that I don't know if every fighter should like even sign with the UFC, to be honest with you, unless they know how to like monetize their way through the UFC, or they just know that they're going to be UFC champion or a top 15 fighter for 10 years, right? Either way. Anyways, what was I saying? What was the topic?
I don't know. I started falling asleep.
Yeah,
You were
me
talking,
too.
and then
I
I
was
started
like,
falling
what
asleep.
was that?
boring.
I gotta be honest, my ADD started
the
acting up.
UFC, the model of the UFC, right? Now they're starting to push out all the big contracts, right? And signing the contender series fighters,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And contender series fighters they get signed for the bare minimum.
Also, how many people over that season get signed?
Almost like pretty much everybody, it seems like.
But how
Really?
many
Yeah, it
numbers would you say?
drastically
Like
changed,
100?
right?
Yeah,
less?
recently it just went up
It
crazy.
was super hard.
But I'm like, how do they
Yeah.
have all the? How do they have,
Because
like,
now
room for
they
all these
understand that they could sell the same product and get rid of the old names and the big contracts.
Mm.
Yeah.
And get for like one main fighter that you're paying like 100K, 200K, you could get 5 other guys that are fighting their.
Yeah, but don't they
hearts
think
out.
in the long run that's gonna lose?
No, because
them?
they already got all the TV deals. They
And
they just and
Right.
the superstars are gonna
Okay.
come through those.
Yeah.
O'Malley.
Yeah, O'Malley. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jamal Hill, he was
Yeah,
contender series.
Hill as
O'Malley, they're all champions already.
Yeah.
So it's working.
But now they're making the big bucks.
Yeah, of course
Right.
they're making. But I'm just saying, like a lot of fighters,
Oh.
they get sold that dream, right? But like you might I interview UFC fighters constantly, like a lot, right? And you see UFC fighters come into the UFC and fight twice and get cut and never see them again.
Right.
It's just like
And I
was
think-
was it too early for you to like go into the UFC?
I think a lot of fighters as well, they are probably making good money and maybe in a different brand or something, and then they're willing to take that kind of pay cut to go down in pay because they want the prestige of saying that they fought in the UFC. And I think what ends up happening is it allows the UFC to pay the bare minimum to a lot of
Right.
fighters, and then it's also bloats the UFC so that the fighters themselves are in a more precarious position, so that you're walking on a tightrope. And even if you're, let's say, have 2 boring wins, there's a possibility you can get cut.
Yeah.
And you're like, yo, I won. And they're like, you laid and prayed. And you're like, but I won.
Yeah.
You know?
There's fighters that have fought once and been cut from the UFC.
Yeah.
Like it's very rare, but there have been fighters.
But
that
when
have
you-
done.
But aren't they under like a 4-fight contract or?
It doesn't
something?
matter. Like I talk to fighters about this all the time too. It's like, yo, you just signed a new 4-fight contract. Now for UFC, you know what they're doing? They're locking down certain level of fighters, 6-fight contracts now. Like they're locking them down.
I
Like,
read
it's
something
crazy.
about this.
Yeah, so like I've been talking to fighters about it. Like they just signed a 7-fight contract with the UFC. 7 fights could be 3 years.
This is why we need people like Francis, right? Fighting for fighters' rights.
Mm-hmm.
Who's Francis?
Ngannou.
Francis,
Oh, Francis. Oh,
what the hell?
I was like, who's Francis?
Our friend.
He
Francis.
forgot after he left the UFC.
Yeah.
No, but the thing is, like, if you're a fighter, you should pay. I think you should pay close attention to that, like, lawsuit that's going on right now.
Yeah.
That could affect you in the future. That lawsuit that's going on right now with the UFC and Kung Lee and a few other fighters. But there's a bunch of them.
So are they cutting the fighters, or are they just not getting them fights? Because
they're
I've
cutting
heard
them.
of
They're
that
cutting
because
them.
there's like the contract
Mhm.
is like 4 fights, but say they won't put them on any other fights, and then they're just stuck in that contract
heard that
kind of
with
thing, but they
one.
can't go anywhere
Well,
else.
that's every promotion. But from what I've heard about the UFC, is like the UFC, they cycle through everybody, right? Unless you're like in the special box, right?
Right.
And you're like one of those fighters, right? But other than that, you're getting cycled through the division. So like if you go through one cycle and like they say, hey, we got a fight for you in 3 months. It's against la la la. Do you want the fight? You say no, then you go back on the carousel,
Mm.
and then you gotta wait. And you go the second time. If you say no, you could get shelved for 2 years.
What's
Right.
crazy
UFC
as
has
well.
done that. That's happened.
What's crazy as well is there are guys that they're good fighters and they're constantly winning just enough fights that the UFC, and impressively enough that the UFC will keep them, but they never like hype them.
Mhm.
Mm.
And then suddenly you know, they just kind of slip through the cracks, and then next thing I know, they're like, yeah, this guy's been in the UFC for 15 fights.
Yeah, and
I'm
you're
like,
like,
yeah.
what?
who the fuck is this guy? Like,
Yeah.
because they're never asking for more money.
Yeah.
They're just like, they take every fight. Like
Yeah.
they don't complain. Those are the fighters that they want.
Yeah.
Like you get signed from the Contender Series, you just fight whoever they tell you to fight. You never complain, and you just continue going that way. And if you don't fit the storyline of what we want, then they just cut you. Because every fight they could cut you. You can sign a 4-fight deal. After the first fight of your 4-fight deal, they could cut you.
Yeah.
And there's no compensation.
There's
for
no
you financially.
compensation. No. This is like
they hold the
yeah.
right to terminate contract whenever they
Yeah.
feel.
So
What
the
the-
4-fight deal
It's
doesn't really
crazy.
mean anything. It means that
Yeah.
you're on 4 1-fight deals.
yeah.
That's what fighters look at. it
It's
as.
like it's more the possibility of having
Right.
4
Yeah.
fights.
But
Right.
if you're making like, let's say you're making like 200 grand a fight, then that's a different story. If you want the 7-fight deal,
Yeah.
because you never know, behind the scenes they're possibly giving out signing bonuses to fighters that fighters don't talk about. You know, there's a lot of like money behind the scenes
Mhm.
Yeah.
that fighters don't talk about, right?
Well, and some fighters do talk about how good, at least when you get injured in the fight, how good they're taken care of
Yeah,
and everything.
for
how
sure.
how well the healthcare is.
Right.
At least when you get injured in the fight.
Yeah,
Outside the
yeah.
fight's a different story, from what I understand.
Yeah, it all depends on who you are too. You know, what I mean, it's a company like any other, company. So
Yeah,
it's
it's
just
a
like
business,
people get
absolutely.
favored, compared to other people, right? It just
I think
Mhm.
bring back the sponsorship banners in the
Yeah.
corner.
Yeah,
and
I
having
think so.
logos on
well,
your
the
gear.
uniforms is it's a
Keep
joke.
the uniform fine,
But
right?
you should be able to
At
add
have the
least
some
logo.
logos.
banner,
on it.
yeah. 'cause
Yeah.
That's not costing anyone anything, you know?
Look at
Benefits the fighters.
look at the UFC. Like look at being a UFC fighter, right? Like low level, intro level UFC fighter. This is what you're getting. First, you got to go fight in contender series, and you're fighting somebody that wants it just as bad as you, right? At the same level as you, pretty much, same point of their career as you. You know what I mean? And you're fighting for the contract, so you have to fight this guy. You beat him, you get a contract, which is probably like either it's like 10-10 or 15-15 per fight.
Yeah, I heard it was
Yeah.
like 12 and
Yeah,
12.
12-12, something around 10-15 around that range per fight, and you're signing a 3-4 fight contract with the UFC, but they have the ability to terminate you anytime that they want, even before your first fight, basically. And then they make you wear a uniform, which means that you don't get to bring your own sponsors into the thing. Like, is it good to be a UFC fighter at the start? If you think about it, it doesn't really seem so good.
No.
And let's say you fizz out after 2 fights.
You get that dope shirt with your last name on it.
Yeah, you get that.
Yeah,
you
you
get
can
that fight kit. That,
Yeah, you can
know.
say you're a UFC fighter,
Yeah.
right?